Right. So we welcome back to the House Environment Committee. We're going to continue our testimony this morning with a transition to the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and we welcome Secretary Tebbetts.
Well, good morning. It's great to be here and talk about what's happening in the ag world. For the record, Secretary Anson Tebbetts, Agriculture, Food and Markets. I thought I might begin with maybe our mission statement, and it's kind of a reminder. I like to read it from time to time. What we all do at the Agency of Agriculture. So, what do we all do? We facilitate, support, and encourage the growth and viability of agriculture while protecting the working landscape, human health, animal health, plant health, consumers, and the environment. So that's probably what brings us together today, is that big word, the environment. So that's what we're all about at the Agency of Agriculture. For those that don't know, we're a pretty small agency. We probably have about 140 people full-time working for us. We put on some part-time help during the summer to do some testing and some field work. Whether they're out going getting samples for water, or whether they're going out to gather ticks and test for mosquitoes and stuff like that. So we have probably about 140 full-time employees at the agency. We're about 80% regulatory. The 20% is economic development or agriculture development division. So they help with markets. So they may be helping our dairy farmers market their products. We may be working with the Fruit and Veggie Association and folks like that. We work with the maple industry as well. So there's about 20% of our work is economic development, but about 80% of our work is regulatory. And that may include inspecting slaughter facilities for meat, and maybe from time to time open up a jug of maple to make sure it's meeting all the standards that set in law for maple, whether it's density or flavor. And of course, water quality is a big part of what we do. Part of our regulatory aspect is water quality. So that's kind of what we do. And I think when we got the notice that you wanted us to come before you at the beginning of the session, you wanted a quick update on Act 64. One of the landmark water quality law that's a decade old. And I wasn't around in this capacity when it was adopted about a decade ago, but I've been around the last few years to see the incredible progress because of that law over the last few years. And a lot of partners with this, including our farmers from the Agency of Agriculture, but there's many people out there doing work outside of us, whether it's the conservation districts and partners, whether it's Agency of Natural Resources, our USDA and NRCS partners, all working, pulling in the same direction of working on our water quality issues. We do have a new report, and I think it may be in you get a lot of reports on the 15th of January, so you've probably got 100 in there from different agencies. We've put in on what happened in 2024. We have an annual report, and Nina's going to talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. But I want to just give you a few of the highlights so you get the scope of what we do and the tremendous work that's being done. So 1,274 visits to Vermont farms, a lot dealing with technical assistance. So our staff going out, working with our conservation planners, 1,274 visits to Vermont farms. We hold a lot of events. Education is critical if we're going to meet our goals. So we had 101 events were held with outreach and education to various folks across the state of Vermont. An investment, a tremendous investment that Vermont has put into infrastructure and improving what's happening on the ground. $18.4 million was invested in financial assistance programs across the state. We've awarded 558 projects. This is helping reduce runoff from farms and improve water quality. And of course, part of what we do is regulatory compliance. And we've had 334 regulatory compliance assessments. So that's sort of a snapshot. In this report, I would encourage everyone to read it because it really goes into detail right down to the nitty-gritty of what we're all doing at the agency with our partners trying to improve the water quality of Vermont. And with your permission, Madam Chair, I'm going to turn it to Nina, who's going to give you a much more detailed report on what we're actually doing and some of the progress we've made over the last year and the last decade. Yeah.
For anyone that would like a paper copy of our annual report, I brought some with me.
We do have some folks who like paper copies.
Thank you. You should have enough for everyone, but just take if you prefer one. All right.
Did you send a link also to this report so we can,
Yes.
I guess we have it.
Yes, your committee assistant should have a link. I believe the report was also sent to the committee as part of our submission to the General Assembly. I have a few more, but like sometimes we don't like to print a lot of them just in case. But I know I like to have things on paper, so
Got those trees, huh?
yeah. All right. All right. So just to introduce myself, my name is Nina Gage. We're going to do a little bit of a two-part process. I'm going to talk a little bit about our education, technical assistance, financial assistance programs, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Laura, who's going to focus on our regulatory programs. So just to kind of kick it off, I know you guys have had a lot of folks in the last week and a half talking about water quality. So I don't want to belabor any of the points that you've already got a pretty good foundation on, but we want to make sure to sort of embellish the agricultural aspects of those and answer any questions that the committee might have. So just to kind of reflect briefly before I jump into talking about what we do every day, a large part of what we do is planning and prioritization of our work. So we're heavily engaged with our colleagues at ANR in a variety of statewide and regional planning efforts that apply to essentially all land use sectors. Some examples of those are Vermont's non-point source management plan. We'll be developing a new plan for the next 5 years this year. And at the regional level, we engage really heavily in the tactical basin planning process. So this is a mechanism of looking deeply at where we're at in any given watershed, right? So it's kind of zooming in to a smaller scale and saying, what's going well? What do we need to do in this area? What's different from maybe another part of the state? And what are the strategies that we can employ? You know, do we need more staffing resources in this area? Do we need a special topic of educational events? So tactical basin plans are a really awesome way to kind of zoom in from the statewide level. But then we also do a lot of planning prioritization at the field scale. What I mean by that is like with any individual farm, let's say you have, 150 acres of farmland, right? It's quite a lot of land to understand and manage. So we have both tools and processes designed to help any individual farm operator understand how does changing your management on this field differ from this field over here, right? Because we know that if you're located, let's say directly adjacent to water, you have highly erosive soil types. Those are the fields we might want to work or prioritize. And then we also engage really more broadly across the Agency of Agriculture and some of the sector-wide. So agricultural plans, such as the Farm to Plate strategic plan. Highly encourage if you want some of the more contextual information to invite some of these partners who lead these report processes. I think they're really important to the larger efforts. So I'm going to jump into a little bit more of like what we do every day. So in its most basic form, we're in the business of helping change behavior and specifically working with farms to change how they manage their land. We do this through, educating them.
Do we have this up?
Have you submitted this presentation so folks can
You
follow
don't need to,
along?
I'm just.
I sent it to our to Terry Smith and it should be on its way. If it's not, I can pop off.
Okay, I just couldn't tell.
Okay, my apologies.
No problem. It's no problem, really. Thank you.
So we provide a lot of educational resources, right? If we want to change someone's behavior, the first starting point is helping them understand the issues. We also provide educational events that are helping hone knowledge and skills. So if you want to implement a new practice, what's required to implement that new practice? Is there specialized equipment? what's known, what do your neighbors know, what do other farmers know about how that type of equipment works compared to a different type of equipment. And in the process of making those decisions about a business, your farm business, what do you need to consider? Who do you want to talk to, right? So helping to create some of those stakeholder connections between farmers, folks who've done things really successfully that we want to encourage and promote. We have folks who assist with conservation planning. So like I said, that field scale prioritizing where on the farm to focus. And then we also support farms in their operation and maintenance. So that might be in the form of engineering consultation. If they're having issues with a system on their farm, how can we support them to better manage that system? And it looks really different. Sometimes we're in the shop at a farm, we're providing education. Sometimes farmers come and sit on their computers and part of a class. And then sometimes the technical assistance looks more like, walking around the actual field areas on the farm and understanding hydrology, the issues, maybe what happens at different times of the year, depending on the weather conditions. So it's a crucial part of what we do, right? We had about 1,200 technical assistance visits last year. About half of those are actually through partner organizations at the local and regional level. Some examples are UVM Extension agronomists, right? They can be a really crucial resource for a farm in making a decision about how to change how they grow their crops, right? And then about the other half is through our staff who are working on our financial assistance programs and helping farms sort of navigate the programs in the process. I'm going to talk through each of these programs. I'm going to try to be really brief. So I stuck them all on one slide to get there, but bear with me. So we have 9 separate technical and financial assistance programs that we directly administer through the Agency of Agriculture. The first is an agronomic practice. We support per acre payments for agronomic practices. This includes practices like rotational grazing, manure injection, reduced tillage. Since 2016, I want to sort of reflect on the 10 years since Act 64. In 2016, we had 34 projects, 34 grants through this program. And last year in fiscal 24, we had over 300. So
Representative Logan has a question.
How long are these payments provided to farmers?
how long is a payment provided to a farmer? So there's the Farm Agronomic Practice Program focuses on agronomic practices. These are often annual decisions from a farm based on their business situation and what they're able to take on. So when we can incentivize folks through a very minimal payment that provides the state with really cost-effective solutions, we try to do that. So just to give you an example, the rotational grazing payments, I think it's either $25 or $30 per acre, right? So if you think about a whole acre of land, like it's a pretty large land area. So if we can incentivize operators to employ practices that take more time and money out of their pocket, but provide us with a better benefit in terms of water quality, we try to do that. And we know that the financial considerations for farm operations are often one of the largest barriers. So farms can return to this program. A lot of times farms will actually access USDA support for some of their initial enrollment, and then they'll come to the state for some of those ongoing assistance needs. It's capped per farm and per year. Yeah, but I think, we talk a lot about annual practices and how they play a role in our phosphorus reduction. We'll get into that in a minute. And I think it's really important to reflect that, the largest amount of loading is actually estimated to come from croplands. So we really are looking at how do we influence a farm's decision-making process every year, right? Because that's how they're looking at their business. That's how they're looking at how they afford to live here and work here, right? Like we're trying to reduce those barriers as much as we can. Sorry, I'm going to go a little faster. So just if you guys have questions, please ask them. The Best Management Practice Program focuses on infrastructure. We've also seen a lot of growth in this space. We also support matching federal projects. So when farmers want to access federal funds and they don't have the cost share to be able to do that, the state can step in and help support accessing those funds. The Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or CREP, actually removes land out of agricultural production, and we plant riparian forest buffers in its place. This is a quasi-state and federal program. We partner with USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, NRCS, and FSA. So 2 separate parts of the federal government and the state government. It's an awesome program, very bureaucratic, but amazing. Since 2016, we've planted 324 acres of riparian forest buffers, all land that was previously in agriculture that's been taken out of production to plant those buffers. And getting farmers on board to do that is not a simple process. It takes trust, relationship building, and a lot of awareness about the issues and why they're doing it. The SEEP program incentivizes innovative equipment. So just to give you a little story, there was an effort by UVM Extension, I think it was in 2017, to bring some equipment that was new and innovative from the Netherlands. It's called grassland injection. And they brought this equipment to Vermont for the first time. They piloted on farms across Addison County and then really got farmers excited about something that nobody even knew existed. And now we have, I think, between 4 and 5 systems supported through this program across the state. And an additional, 20 something injection toolbars that we've supported since 2018. So we're not funding tractors. Everyone always asks that question. We don't pay for tractors. We really pay for the toolbars, which is the specialized equipment that allows the practice to be implemented.
And that's the picture up there that we see of the.
Yes. Well, the left is a grain drill. The right side is a grassland manure injection. It's called a shallow slot injection. So a lot of land in agriculture in Vermont is actually hayland. It's grassland. So typically farmers spread manure on top of the grass. This equipment, which is super innovative, allows the injection of manure below the grass or the soil surface, so to reduce surface runoff, but it also doesn't kill the grass, right? A lot of injection toolbars, if you try to run them on grassland, it will actually impact the grassland and the forage production. So farmers won't do it. Why would I inject manure and kill my grass, right? It's just going to have to cost me money to plant more grass. So the grassland shallow slot injection is an example of the type of equipment that we're trying to sort of make people aware of and bring to Vermont and make it accessible for Vermont farms.
Mm-hmm.
The seeding and filter strip program, we released this program in 2018. We made some revisions to the program last year to focus on sort of helping farms who maybe have repeat flood issues to help shift some land more to perennial vegetation, right? So if they keep getting their corn land, same cornfield, it's getting hit year after year, flood after flood. What can we do to incentivize them to change that land to perennial forage production while also supporting them to understanding that there's a lot of land pressure. Farmers aren't necessarily going to have the economic situation to be able to give up their farm land, which a lot of our other sort of long-term easement programs might require. So trying to fill those gaps between what programs the state has to offer. A couple more, sorry, I'll be quick. The pasture surface water fencing program focuses on pasture management, so really excluding livestock from surface water and supporting the grazing system that is really larger part of how the farm manages. So grazing is an awesome pathway for farms, really great for water quality compared to other management practices, but it requires a lot of knowledge. And sometimes I've got 2 pictures of watering tubs. So if you tell a farm they can't access the stream, we're going to say we're going to fence this stream out. The first thing they're going to say is, well, what's the water my cows are going to drink, right? So we help develop watering tubs. This is a super simple solution that enables them to be on board with fencing the cows out of water. The Vermont Farmer Ecosystem Stewardship Program is an incentive program. We provide an incentive payment for folks to actually enroll in a USDA holistic whole farm program called the Conservation Stewardship Program. This came out of about 3 years of working group process under the Payment for Ecosystem Services and Soil Health Working Group. This was a recommendation that came from that group. So we had some one-time funding to support this, and it's an ongoing program. We received a $7 million grant from USDA to pilot a program called the Vermont Pay for Performance Program. A lot of the programs I've talked about are pretty straightforward. You do this, we pay you this. Well, there's this whole new world in conservation called performance-based programming. So we actually we won a competitive grant process at the national level. We were one of 9 projects selected nationally to pilot this. So we're in year 3 of that program now. Our grant funding is going to run out at the end of 2025, at the end of the state fiscal 26. So we're going to seek additional funding to continue this, but it's been an incredible learning process. Could spend like 3 hours telling you all about it. And then last but very not least, the Agricultural Clean Water Initiative program. We offer funding to local and regional partners. So we acknowledge that creating relationships and trust with a farm is really important when you go and tell them what to do on their land. And so we leverage the local and regional partners heavily in the work that we do. Sometimes it's sharing information about regulations. Hey, Bob, here's the RAPs. Do you know what they are? It's very important that you do, right? The other option is, we leverage both. I would say 2 examples are extension and the conservation districts, but there's a variety of organizations that work in different parts of the state. Sorry, I'm talking really fast. How am I doing on time? Like 20. Okay. So last year we had about 18.4 million in overall awards, 558 projects on farms. And you can see there's sort of a big jump in the last few fiscal years through American Rescue Plan Act. So really significant historic investments through coming out of COVID that the federal government provided for Vermont. I think it's important to understand that a large portion of the funding that goes towards all these projects is also match funding. So we're leveraging federal funds and farmer funds. We're saying, if you put this on the table, we can help you, but you need to have skin in the game too, right? We're helping invest in water quality, but it's also for your farm. So we really make sure to sort of bring the farms to the table and sometimes the federal government to help provide cost share towards projects. Okay, a little bit of context. So we do all these programs. Well, what's the result, right? So the state uses a process called the Clean Water Performance Report. I think Neil and Julie mentioned it the other day in their testimony. Highly encourage you to ask the group who puts this report together to come in and provide the full picture across all land use sectors. But I'm going to just talk a little bit about how it applies to our programs. So as you can see, we're about 26% of our progress towards meeting the Lake Champlain TMDL as of fiscal 2024 results. You can see agriculture plays a really significant role in what we're able to estimate in terms of phosphorus reductions between 80 and 90%, depending on a given fiscal year. The Lake Champlain Basin is the little red, oh, you guys can't see that. Just quick reminder for those, it's sort of the areas in red on that little map in the right-hand corner. Oh, I think that box is not something I can control.
It's fine.
Sorry. To zoom in a little bit, so how does this relate directly to our program and to the agricultural sector? So agriculture, out of all the reductions the state is able to estimate, agriculture is about 80, 90%, like I said. If we look at specifically what the agricultural sector is required to do under the TMDL, we need to reduce loading from agriculture by 143.3 metric tons. And based on where we're at 33% of that, the progress to get there. And that's more than we're at statewide, right? 26% statewide, which I mentioned on the previous slide. Zoom in a little bit further, okay? How does what I just talked about and what Laura's going to talk about directly impact these? Our agency's programs and the data and the tracking that we're able to support are about 77% of all the reductions that the state can capture. The Water Quality Division, the Agency of Agriculture. Just to give you like an example of how this compares, the fiscal 24 Clean Water Fund budget, our programs are about we receive about 24% of that budget. And that ranges between $40 and $50 million a year. We're about 24% of that comes to our program. But at the same time, our program's results are really high compared to some of the other programs and sectors. There's a lot of reasons behind that. We have lots of tracking and accounting work to develop in other sectors. But we also have a really cost-effective way of reducing phosphorus. I have a friend, she's a landscape designer and she does rain gardens, and they're beautiful rain gardens, but you have to think about what you're treating when you treat stormwater runoff or road runoff and what that looks like, right? So sometimes, I'm going to show you guys some pictures, we're dealing with a really not great looking situation and we're able to make some improvements. So sometimes those improvements are really substantial and they can come in a very cost-effective way. Just to show you in the Lake Memphremagog watershed, which is you can sort of see it there, the purple area on the map. Again, agriculture is a really consistently large portion of what we're able to measure in estimated reductions from agriculture. We need to reduce specifically agricultural reductions by 11.7 metric tons per year under the Lake Memphremagog TMDL. So the agricultural sector is about 18% of the way there. That's a little bit closer. For Memphremagog, overall statewide, we're at 17% of our progress. And again, our program is just a small portion of the pie when it comes to the budget, but we're providing about 78% of the estimated reductions. So again, agriculture is really cost effective for making improvements in water quality. You can see how big we are, in the pie chart, right? There's a lot of runoff coming from farms. We know this. That doesn't necessarily mean anything other than it's a huge opportunity for how we improve. And for folks from the Connecticut River Basin, we are working to develop reduction accounting methods. Part of it is about developing a baseline, and our colleagues and friends at DEC would love to dive deep on all of the Clean Water Performance Report across all land use sectors. I just wanted to sort of give you some context for our program's efforts and how that contributes to the larger tracking. We don't do any of this alone. We work really closely with partners. We have a ag water quality partnership. It's an MOU across 9 state and federal agencies. We meet with them all the time. We actually have a big session tomorrow. We're going to do some strategic planning for the upcoming year. So this is working with NRCS, working with DEC, working with the Basin Program, working with the districts, working with UVM, US Fish and Wildlife. We all share these goals to improve water quality, but that coordination is really, I think it's always undervalued in the work that we do, is making sure that we're being as effective and efficient as we can by working across organizational lines. Just a couple photos to hit the point in. What do we do? What does it look like? Just an example of a best management practice program project. This is a barnyard, denuded barnyard area that was improved up in Franklin County, before and after photos. This is a conservation reserve enhancement program. It's you can see the pre-photo. Cows have access to the surface water. The banks are very denuded. Same year after implementation of essentially the seeding and planting of the trees, you can see the trees have little stem protectors that then later got removed. And then 14 years later, and I'll say the guys who work on this program are still working on this program. So we have a lot of really dedicated staff who, they've been here for a long time, and we're able to sort of know where these projects have happened and make sure to stay on top of them.
Can you just go back to the previous slide really quickly? I didn't,
Yeah.
because that looks like is that a photograph on the right?
Yep, so they're both photographs. The barn, the red barn, is the same barn, so the view is slightly shifted. The farm was so excited after this project, he bought a drone and took some drone pictures, so he sent them along to us. But it's the viewpoint's slightly shifted, but you're looking at the same bank that's been essentially, we install a heavy use area protection. This is concrete. It makes it easier for the farm to manage. They keep their cows in that area instead of putting them out on the landscape where they're going to cause a lot of impacts.
Thank you.
Yeah. Pasture and surface water fencing program. Yeah, Representative.
Representative Tagliavia.
Back up one slide, please.
Yeah.
From 2008 pre-CREP to 2022, 14 years later, were you able to, or are you able to track the reduction in phosphorus?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. So riparian forest buffer has a 40% reduction in overall phosphorus loading for the land area where the buffer's been implemented. Yeah, and that's exactly why that big graph of where I showed you all the yellow. These are the practices that we're putting in place, and we're able to estimate the benefits from them as a result. A couple other quick examples. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague. This is a pasture and surface water fencing program. So you can't quite see it, but there's a fence line right here. Okay. So we work with this farm. We say, we really want to move your cows farther away from the stream. We want to seed the area. And then in this photo, you can just barely see it. There's a cow right there. So we move the fence line back. We put a very simple practice in. It provides a really intense amount of benefits for water quality. This is a seeding and filter strip program. You can tell this one actually is taken pretty well. This is the same tree here and here. So this farm had their required 25-foot buffer. We were able to incentivize them to put a 50-foot buffer in. And you can see how big of a difference that is for capturing runoff as it comes across a field. All right, that's the end of my piece. If you guys have any questions on programs, I can answer.
Representative Tagliavia.
The buffer that in the previous slide, is that a buffer that gets mowed only maybe once or twice a year or once every other year? Or is that a buffer that would be allowed to grow up the trees?
So this specific buffer can be harvested. One of the things that we really talk about with farms is when you have a field, I'm gonna use my notebook here. Here's my field, my agricultural field, and I'm gonna have a buffer on the edge of it. If it's capturing runoff, it can become saturated. So there are a lot of programs that, we have available for farms that don't allow them to harvest that filter strip. And there are reasons for that. There's also a benefit when you tell a farm, would you be willing to make your buffer bigger if it actually provided you with hayland? If we make it the same size as your hay equipment and it actually provides you with forage, and you're harvesting nutrients off of that buffer. You're not applying nutrients in that buffer per se, but you're harvesting nutrients that are otherwise running off this field and sitting in that grassland, right? So there's different, the long and short of it is there's different requirements depending on the program. This specific program allows harvestable buffers.
What nutrients are you actually able to capture? Nitrogen, phosphorus, stuff like that, and you have
Correct.
accurate calculations for how much you're actually capturing?
We have estimated phosphorus reductions that are based on very extensive peer-reviewed literature. We have a standard operating procedures for tracking and counting of agricultural practices. Happy to share that document with you. We work really closely with DEC on the development of that document so that the state is confident in our tracking and accounting processes. All of our reduction efficiencies are more conservative than what the literature suggests because we know there is variability between research and real life.
One more question if I could.
Yeah.
I had land in CRP at
Yeah.
one time. I didn't see that listed. What happened with that program?
So CRP. Oh, there we go. CRP is crap without the enhancement. The
Okay.
enhancement enables the state to offer a very small additional incentive payment for the lands being enrolled. So it is the same program. CRP and CREP. CREP is the difference is the landowner gets an additional incentive program. It's very small. The federal government still owns the lease, the easement essentially on the land. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, Austin.
Yep. So, in terms of your goal that you're working towards, how long do you think it will take for you to meet your goal?
I always say when we have a lot of farm meetings this time of year, and I always say, don't pretend like we don't have a lot of work to do. But I think what we're able to say is that the investments in capacity and programming that we have put in place are effective and that we're starting to see the benefits and results of those investments, right? You can see the
Oh,
trajectory.
yeah, no, I love the before and after. That is
I think
awesome.
the amount of time depends on a number of things, some of which are in our control and some of which aren't. Funding and capacity are huge, and landscape and climatic changes and natural disasters don't help. So it's all part of the puzzle that we're working on. And just like we don't like floods, neither do the farms. It's a really rough situation that can put both maybe improvement clean water projects that we have in the works with them on hold, as well as other business issues. So nobody likes flooding.
Right.
Less of that.
I get the sense there's a time sensitive nature because the next presenter, I'm guessing, has a lot to say to us, so we're going to transition. Thanks. Thank you for your presentation.
Well, hello, I'm Laura DePietro, and I'm the Director of Water Quality. I've worked at the Agency of Agriculture for 20 years. I originally started in the CREP program. I did that for 5 years. And for the last 15, I have worked basically in the regulatory space predominantly, as well as in those cost share programs that Nina has shared. So I'm really knowledgeable about all of the requirements and rules. I've been part of developing all of the rules that have been created, most of them requested by this body that the agency do over these years. So I'll go through a little bit about the structure of how we operate, and then I know you've learned a little bit about some of the federal stuff too, and I'll show you how that may connect with that so that you can get a little more education there. But what we do in our regulatory space in water quality is we go and we inspect farms. It's a little bit different. Some of the other sectors, they do annual reporting, right? So if like you have a stormwater permit, you might just submit an annual report to the state and they may spot check you from time to time. Agriculture is very different. The legislative body told us you will go visit these farms and you will inspect these farms. And for us, that is really holistic. And I'll show you some data to explain how holistic it really is. But involved with that also is, we do a lot of coordination, and it's not only with just the Agency of Natural Resources, but it's also with the Attorney General's office, because there are some cases that reach that level, and I'll explain a little more about that. So Act 64 has been a decade. I know you were hearing some of that earlier, and I just made a small list here. I literally, if I made the real list of everything we've done, it wouldn't fit by any means. It's 2-point font on here, but some of the big things, and I hope you can appreciate when I just say that, it's like, oh, we revised the rules twice. That sounds easy, right? You do something twice, but the reality is like the first time we revised the required ag practices, which are the general non-point source pollution rules for all farms in the state, we did over 90 public meetings. We were all over the place because the benefit I think we got from that was farmers were educated about what was required of them. And I think that attributes a lot to the amazing reductions that you're seeing, is that farmers were a part of understanding why they had to do it and then how to implement it. But we set up huge programs. Like, it's no small feat to set up a certification program for hundreds of farms. That required us, we worked with NOFA. We didn't want farms to duplicate what they had to submit to any government body of some sort because they regulate for the organic standards. We also worked with UVM Extension to create certification classes and education because they're so good at that, right? They're the masters of educating everyone. Help us teach people who spread manure how to do it and what the rules are and how to look at a nutrient management plan and implement it appropriately. So a lot of partnership goes in there. So it sounds really easy to be like, oh, we certify small farms, but it's a lot more than that. Prior to the Act 64, small farms were never inspected regularly, right? So that was a huge change to bring those into the fold and regulate them. And so we have to inspect them on a regular basis. And we had to write rules to say who specifically that is, which we wrote rules that said anybody with 50 cows or more. So we set a threshold, and then by complaint driven, we go to anyone who does that. And one thing to keep in mind about what we regulate in terms of the capacity and scope that we do, we spend time on backyard farms. It is a reality that neighbors live close to each other. There's a lot of different kind of homesteading going on in Vermont. And the reality is the complaints would come right to us, right? They may not be water quality at all. There could be water nowhere near, but there's property boundary issues, and we do regulate in that space. So, from the largest of farms to the smallest of backyards, I wouldn't say any one is less complicated than the other, but we're out there doing that work regulatorily. We revised MOUs. So there's an MOU with the Agency of Natural Resources that coordinates how we do our work. And then the Attorney General's office as well, the three parties, Agency of Ag, Agency of Natural Resource, and the Attorney General's office, all have an equal understanding of when do you send something to the Attorney General's office? When is it their role to take a look and decide if they want to enforce in that space? All farms after Act 64 had to get education. They were required to do that. And so normally that's something that's like, for, I don't know, having a professional engineering license, right? You have to get continuing education. To be farming, you now have to get continuing education credits, right? So we created all of that infrastructure and programming with the partnership. In addition to those two other rules, 2 times we did the RAPs, we've also revised our best management practice rules, which is that program of that concrete barnyard. We just recently passed a technical service provider rule. And then a general permit, while it's not the same as rulemaking process, it's still not an easy process to revise a general permit. There's a public process involved in it. We've done that twice, right, for the medium farms that we regulate. So just,
Just to pause right there, because you probably have members that don't know what a general permit is.
Okay. A general permit is a permit that applies to a class or a group of people. So for us, the medium farm general permit applies to people as there's different animal types, but if we talk dairy, anyone from 200 to 699 cows. So if you fall in that category of having that many mature dairy cows, you need to comply with the terms within that permit. And so you sign up and say, I agree to those terms, and then we regulate you to those terms. And that one's, it's at every 5 years, you have to revise it. So that's why we've done it twice. The big one was we revised the TMDL for Lake Champlain. That was no small feat. Lots of meetings with EPA, Tetra Tech, the consultant who built that. Lots of discussions with partners and scientists to try and figure out how do we get to where today we're able to show you all these numbers and this information, but it took a lot of work to get to that space. We were, the advocates, the environmental advocates suggested at one point that there weren't enough BMPs on farms. And so we went through a process with them and created a settlement agreement. And we've gone out and implemented the BMPs, the best management practices on farms that need to be implemented to meet those terms. There's been a lot of discussion over the time of saying, the ag agency is not transparent. We're not giving information to people. We've increased that because that's not everything we do as a public record. We're a government agency, right? And so we've made sure that transparency is significantly increased and that people can see whatever they need to see. We've dealt with some very large records requests in this space, right? A lot of the work that you hear from environmental advocates, a lot of it comes from the work that they've done to do records requests of us. One staff, I remember at one point, one of them came up, he had over 20,000 emails, that he had to submit for this. It is no small feat. It takes us lots of hours. It's significant. And it's a role that government has to play, but it's not easy. And so one of the things we've done, if I skip down sort of lower in this, is we built IT systems to help us do better. Because one summer, Vermont Law School asked us for everything with the word water in it. And this is back when we still had banker boxes, right? Of paper, everything was paper. And it was an entire summer, and it was like, it crushed us, right? So if we want all this progress as a state to make farms do all this work, we have to have the time and capacity to do it. And if we're spending our time pulling paper, it's not working on implementing farms. And so again, both are really important, but we found a way to create efficiency and get that done much more efficient so that we can just digitally get everything out. We have one of the best, and this is all credit to Nina, one of the best SharePoint sites in state of Vermont. And if any of you have started to use that space, you know, it's like, what is this thing? Is it Word, or is it still like we used to do with Microsoft? It's different, and there are some powers and tools to it. And so we have really utilized that to connect it to our databases and just be super efficient so that our records are really tight. I also look back, you know, in 2015, we used to move $2.2 million. That felt like a lot back then. And you hear today, we're moving 18.4 million. That is not easy to go from one, you know, that amount to a higher level like that. Especially, you know, government is good for all the things it is, but there's a lot of process to get money out the door with government. And so to be able to be nimble in that space and to continue to do that year after year, all those reduction charts that you see for all those dollar signs, that is us just constantly turning out money. So it's just really impressive. Very small staff. You can see I've got that we had 13 staff in 2014, and today we have 33 staff. So we've hired about 20 people, and that also takes an enormous resource, right, to bring these people. And we've also, of course, had turnover too, which is never fun and always work. So I just want to point out, and I hope you take the message home, we are a small team, we are a mighty team, and I am so grateful to have a team that is so dedicated and cares so much about what they do. They come here because they care about the environment, and they work on farms because they like the outdoors and they like working with people who also are working outdoors. So while we're doing all that, that's the government being busy. I just want to give you some reflection about what has also happened in the ag community during this time, right? We lost 350 farms, 72,000 acres of land that was in ag production. This is not small. We're seeing it. We're seeing housing developments. We have housing pressures. One of the things that changes in Act 250 didn't impact that space in the middle, the agricultural land. And so development there is still under the old regime per se, but it is still being lost. And so it's just really important to recognize this impact. And a lot of it is because this was a stat that was done that a lot of farms are not very profitable. It is very hard. The margins are very tight in agriculture. So you're losing a lot of these farms. So, you know, 57% of farms are unprofitable with a combined loss of 85 million. We're a pretty small state. That's a big number. You saw from Nina, during that time, farms were still doing all of this stuff. And personally, that is like, I think the most interesting thing is how resilient farmers are, despite how much pressure they can be under from financial, from, you know, environmental advocacy, and from us. They're at their farm all the time asking them what they're doing and documenting it. They're still doing it. And I think that says a lot. There is this mantra, right, of the fox watching the hen for the Agency of Agriculture. And I just want to be really clear. I show you that data because I think it's just important to understand the pressures. You know, our staff, we have trainings with them about Farm First, about farmer suicide, right? Like these are not small and light conversations. Showing up at someone's farm to regulate them is not easy. They're not always, those are not warm, fuzzy conversations, right? And often, unfortunately, our staff are subject to being yelled at by people, right? We've had instances where we've had to be escorted by police to farms. We take this job very seriously, our safety of our staff very seriously, but I want you to understand the enormity. Like this isn't just light work, and we're not ignoring the work, right? It takes a lot to get up every day and go and do this work. And if you talk to the farmers that, you know, we're not loved, right? Because we're their regulator. They have an appreciation for the resources and tools that we provide, but they're also understanding, you know, this is our role that we have to play. So I say all of that for that context to just understand the nature of this work. But one thing I want to share is just on the graph behind me, you can see our trajectory is up in terms of the amount of work we're doing on farms. And one of the things I want to share with you is just this blue part of the chart is enforcement follow-up. So what it's representing is it's one thing to say we go and we inspect a farm, we write a report, and we send an enforcement action because we found violations. Well, you have to go follow up on that, right? And that body, and you still have to do every year, you got to be back out there inspecting. And so this volume of work that is going on, because we're increasing our capacity in people, that increases the capacity of enforcement, which then creates more need to get back out on the farm. But that's what we've been doing. And you can see this is 2015 right here. This is maybe on average, 40, 50 farm enforcement actions a year. You can see it's well over up to 100. So it's doubled. So since Act 64, that capacity provided us the ability to be out there and have more boots on the ground and find more violations and then hold people accountable in that space.
I may interrupt for just a moment. This slide deck is up for folks who might want to look closer so they can see it better.
Thank you. So the other thing here to just show you is the discussion with ANR or DEC. So DEC is a department of the Agency of Natural Resources. So for me, if I say one or the other, I mean both, right? So I'm talking DEC, ANR. And so one of the things the question is this MOU we have, how often are we sharing information with DEC? And so just to share, the turquoise chart, bar on the chart is how often and how many referrals, which is when we see something that might be a discharge on a farm, we have to send it to them. So within usually 24 hours, we send them a packet that says, here it is, here's a picture, here's a map, here's all the things you need to know about this. But one other important piece to just document is we are still writing a report, a full inspection report on what we saw. And often, the nature of these things can be tricky with timing and weather, right? It could be raining the day we're there and not raining if ANR goes back. And so ANR can still use our report, and they do. If you look at their website, they're using we're one state government, right? So it doesn't matter necessarily who's out there doing that work. The enforcement and the regulation on these farms is still there because it has been documented. So I want to just take a moment and to explain a little bit, because you've heard a couple pieces about this federal CAFO Clean Water Act, right? You've had a lot of education lately. I hope you're absorbing it all at lightning speed. But there are two different levels, right? It's federal government and state government. And I want to explain how the Agency of Agriculture, what our role is, and then what that federal role is. And so the Clean Water Act does CAFO. So those two are synonymous, right? That is for farms that are discharging, point source discharging, direct discharging into water. Then there's the landscape runoff, right? All of the other runoff that may not be getting there directly, but you can assume all water eventually gets downhill one way or another, right? And so diffusely it is getting to the waters. That is non-point source. And that is where the Agency of Agriculture has a role, and we have programs. And I apologize, I put acronyms up here and I'll say the acronyms because I want to train you in all the acronyms so that you got them down pat. But the RAPs are the required ag practice rules. So those are the rules that we have that apply to everyone. Medium farm operation and large farm operation are the other two categories. And again, those are categories based on the size. And medium farms, we regulate in general permits, and large farms, we regulate on individual permits. But these permits, and I'll go into this a little bit more, are different than CAFO permits. So to back up a little bit farther, one of the challenges with the federal CAFO requirement is that there have been several cases where initially there was a rule written in 2003, and it said if you are a farm of a certain size and you potentially might discharge, you need to apply for a CAFO permit. Courts went through that and the decision was made, and you can see here, I've highlighted it, that the regulatory scheme enacted by Congress, the Clean Water Act, gives EPA jurisdiction to regulate and control only actual discharges, not potential discharges. And then EPA revised the CAFO rule, and it went to court again. And that was what they revised it to say was for farms who propose to discharge, if they're designed, constructed, operated, and maintained such that a discharge would occur, that they need to get a permit. And the court shut that down. They said, no, you can't. You can only regulate an actual discharge. So what do you do in that space, right? Like if you're saying that you can actually look at something and say, I think this connects, right? Like if you were going to look at this and this seems important that it needs to be regulated. At the federal level, that is a challenge. But what you have built here in the state of Vermont with your legislative guidance to us of what to build is you have A&R who can issue those permits, right? APOs who are discharging. And then you have the medium farm and the large farm rules at the Agency of Agriculture that can issue permits for when farms aren't meeting that high level standard of an actual discharge, right? They're meeting something in between in that gray area, or it's much more diffuse than that. And so our regulations that we have can prevent a discharge. We can say, we think something might happen in this space. So therefore, enforcement action, please correct it, make it better. We don't want to see it happen, right? We want to stop it before anything like that might happen. And more, the RAPs apply to everyone. The latest census in Vermont says there's about 6,500 farms in Vermont. These rules apply to farms who meet those requirements. Not all 6,500, granted, probably because the census data is a little shifted, but it's a large body of farms that fall under those regulatory sets. And those regulatory sets say you cannot discharge. So everything we have at the Agency of Agriculture is above and beyond that standard, right? You cannot discharge, but you also can't even look, smell, or whatever, like you might think about discharging, right? The other thing I want to share is, it's like, okay, well, these are just different permit programs. Why aren't they this, like, what's the difference between the two? And the difference is when you have a federal requirement, you can make a state requirement that is greater than that, right? And so that's what you did with the programs that you asked us to build at the Agency of Agriculture. And so some similarities, right? They both have infrastructure built to a certain storm event. So in a production area, you need to have stuff that's built so that it can handle a certain storm. Both have nutrient management plans, which is the plan on a farm that says, where are you going to put your manure and your fertilizer and what crops you're going to grow to make sure that everything is in balance so that the soils and cycle are not prone to runoff because they're going in the crops and they're being recycled back on the farm. But one of the big differences is the CAFO permit allows a discharge, right? So if you have an accidental discharge and you did all of your things correctly, or if there's a bigger rain event than that infrastructure, you're allowed to discharge. Our permits say that you cannot discharge at all. And so one of the things I just want to clarify is a lot of times what we're talking about is a discharge that meets none of those standards, right? It is potentially like a manure pit overflows because the person didn't empty it, right? That is a management issue. It has nothing potentially to do with the infrastructure and design of it. And so that kind of discharge, the management type of stuff, it's not allowed under anybody's permit, to be clear. Those are not the things we're talking about. So that is consistent across all, that nobody can have those kinds of management discharges. And then, we have additional erosion standards. We also on our large farms deal with the traffic, odor, flies, noise, and other pests. So nuisance things can be dealt with in our permitting. We also have construction. So if a farm wants to expand, the first thing you have to do is build a house, right, for the cows. And so that requires them to come to us and we can then have a stop checkpoint to say, do you have the land for that before you build it? And that's not something in CAFO. In CAFO, you can continue to build as long as you continue to manage yourself and have enough land. The only check-ins are annually. You submit a nutrient management plan to whatever entity. I've heard you had some conversations about citizen suits. That is a difference. Our permits are directly, the neighbors or persons who are directly aggrieved are the ones that are party to those. So that is a difference. You may eventually in the future talk buffers. The federal government, CAFO could have 0 buffer. You can plow right up to the edge of a brook. And then there's alternatives. You could also set back 35 feet. You could also have something equivalent. And so, for instance, like in Maine and in New York, their equivalent that they've come up with is 15-foot buffers on streams. So in Vermont, we have done 25-foot on streams, and then we've also added 10-foot on ditches. So we felt like, and we require all these other things like the erosion and additional nutrient management practices. We have a winter spreading ban. We're one of the first states, I think we were the first state that created that. In the federal, that doesn't exist because not all states have winter like we do. We also have limits where if you have too much phosphorus in your soil, you have to have a reduction plan. In the federal, that doesn't exist, right? There's some risk factors for phosphorus, but there's not something specific of taking a test and saying it's too much. we have storage requirements because we have winter, right? If you think about that other permit, other states can apply all year round. And some of them can apply again in the winter. We require storage for half the year to make sure that you have enough capacity. So the ban in Vermont on winter spreading is about 107 days, but we make them have 180 days of storage so that there's that buffer of making sure that they have that capacity. And one of the biggest ones, and this is a real challenge in other parts of the country, is that CAFO does not regulate groundwater. And the required ag practice rules have a great deal about groundwater in them. And so if farms impact groundwater, we can hold them accountable to make sure that they stop doing whatever practices they're doing to bring that water quality back up to standard. So just a couple of regional examples of how these programs are being played out. So I'll just start with Vermont, right? DEC manages CAFO permits. I know you've been asked, there are 0 permits. That was a question you got this morning. And that is the basis of that discussion, you know, with EPA and ANR and the advocates. But what AAFM does is we have these MFO permits. There's 97 of them. We inspect them every 3 years. Then we have 36 large farm permits that we inspect every year. In Maine, EPA has approved the 2, I generically use just ag or environmental department. They all have names that are long, but I think you get the gist of the two types of organizations. The 2 agencies have worked together. There's an MOU that EPA has approved. The Agency of Agriculture in Maine is the eyes and ears on the ground to do all the inspections on farms. They have what they call the LOP, stands for Livestock Operation Permits. And so the majority of their permits are those permits. The DEC over there has issued 6 CAFO permits. But if you look at census data, there's potentially 33 farms that would fall under a CAFO permit. So they're not permitting the full universe. And they only inspect those every 5 years, once every 5 years, which is the minimum federal requirement. In New York, which is a big dairy state, right, there are no CAFO permits at all. What New York has chosen to do is create a state permit similar to how we have a medium or a large farm permit, except it is issued by their DEC. And it only applies to the bigger farms, right? There are no regulations like our RAPs for all the other farms. And so essentially their state level permit is a no discharge permit, same concept. And what's interesting for them though, is that that permit really is only for, in the inspection process is only 300 cows up. Federally, the threshold is 200 cows and up. So they do complaint basis between the 200 and 300 threshold, which for us, that's a significant number of our farms are in that category. And then New Hampshire has 1 permit that's issued by EPA because they're not a delegated state. The census suggests there could be 14 farms in that category, and EPA comes to inspect that once every 5 years. Otherwise, the rest of the state, there are no alternative permit or regulatory programs other than just looking for complaints and looking for higher level standards. So Vermont stands out. I hope you see that. Like the work that we have all done to get these regulations in place is significantly greater than what I see in other states. And, you know, EPA has selected me to be on a national CAFO committee. So I'm working with them and learning from other states what's going on. And it's fascinating. Like one example is you could have a farm that has, 1,000 cows or 4,000 cows. And there you could export all your manure to another farm that has all the land and no cows. The federal CAFO, the only regulatory trigger is cows. So if you don't have any cows on any of this thousands of acres of land, it is unregulated essentially by the federal requirement. And if there's no state regulations, there's no regulations. And so in Vermont, what you have built is that the required ag practices cover those. Right? And they cover them with the same standard that would apply to the largest of farms. It's the nutrient management standard, and we inspect them. So we have this like amazing safety net and amazing process that you've built to make sure that there's coverage much better than other states have in this country. Okay, 2 more slides and I'm gonna show you some data real quick. So I told you we created some databases and some efficiencies to make our lives easier because it was getting a bit overwhelming, to be clear. And this is an example, and I've redacted some stuff, and I know it's really small, but just it says inspection, enforcement, technical assistance, but these are mostly our visits that are our regulatory visits. So we're able to use this to log it all, to create a report out of it, and then it captures that data. So all these fancy charts and stuff we're able to show you, it's because we've got a system that now keeps track of that data. And so this is one particular farm. It's a large farm. On average, we're out there twice a year, right? So we're supposed to regulate once a year, but on average, we're out there twice a year because we get a complaint. For the same farm, these are the enforcement actions that we're able to do. And what's helpful is you can start to see, you know, they've had several enforcement actions. We send warnings, we send penalties, we send consultations to try and get them to sit down and explain to us because we may not understand something. And then we can see the status of it and follow it. So this is the kind of data for the regulatory side we're capturing. And then we have what we call a partner database. So that big partnership that Nina said is going to do all that strategic planning starting tomorrow. They all have a system they can use because if all these folks are running around implementing stuff on farms, we want to track that, right? That's how we get to these reductions and show how much farmers are doing. And so they have a separate database that folks like me, because I'm regulatory, can't go into because I'm restricted, which is fine. But it allows them to have space to report data up into. And so certain people in our agency obviously can get in here, but we try to create the separation. So that way, you know, there's this freedom of partners like UVM Extension to feel like they can go out and work with a farm and not feel like, you know, we're going to be watching and be like, oh, let's put them on our inspection list. So we've created this space so that partners can really work with farmers and farmers can feel like they can come forward and say, I know I have a problem. I need help. Help me fix it because they're probably going to come and inspect me soon. And I need to understand what's going on and how to fix it. So the next thing I'll just do, which is the last thing, is just to take you on a drive because we took all of this and it's on a public dashboard. And this is I want you to learn and use this and look at it and ask us questions forever if you have. I see, I don't know if there's any questions.
If you have a moment, Representative Austin.
Did your agency create that software?
No, we hired a contractor. So Stone Environmental, which is actually based out of here in Montpelier, ended up working with us and they've been fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's taken, I'm not going to lie, 10 years to get here. We have invested a significant amount of money. You know, it's phenomenal, but it has completely changed the game on what we can do in terms of managing data because, you know, public wanted access to make sure and understand that what we're doing is what it is.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. So just high level, there's an instruction page. The way that this operates is there's a toggle here and it comes up to a menu and you choose things from this menu and you can scroll in that menu. So these are all of our pages that you can look in and see what are we doing. And then so if you forget, you can go back to this instruction page. But I want to show you the high level summary. Like for instance, this is the 2024. Wow, internet's super slow. You know, we talked about, we spent $18 million, right? We've done 55 referrals to DEC. So you can see this is like high level summary of the year. But then you can also get into, if I were to choose here, for instance, enforcement, right? So some of these graphs you can see, I snipped them and put them in the PowerPoint earlier. But what's really cool is you can be like, well, okay, well, that's 2024. Let me see, what did you do in 2023? You know, and this one doesn't change too much because you've got all the years laid out. But what if I said, I only want to look at small farms? Let me look at small farms. Like that's the data on small farms. And then you unclick small farms to go back to all the farms, right? So you can look at, we have small farms. Other for us is often like a custom applicator, medium, large farms, and certified small farms. So you can change all these years. You can look at all the different things that we do. You can look at the phosphorus reductions, right? And one thing I want to say just about this graph, do you see how steep that graph goes? I've lived here, you know, maybe 25 years now. I'm losing track. And I can tell you when I started in this job, it was very different. When I went out on the landscape and worked with farmers, because I worked in the buffer program, people were plowing right into the buffers. I was seeing it fall into the ditches, into the streams. They were moldboard plowing, which meant they were turning the entire profile of the soil over, which meant you had a lot of ability for erosion. Now, I hope you see it. You see greener fields in the winter, right? Like you don't see manure all the time because it's being injected. And so the smell is also down. All of these practices, literally, you can see they weren't doing them just a few years ago. And now they are. And a lot of what they're doing on their own without cost share. And we're able, more and more, we're able to capture that through some of this work that we're doing. So I just would give you this, you can toggle, you can say like, look, I want to check what's going on here in this particular county or watershed. So you can click on anything, just anything you click on, just unclick it to get back. It's the master of it. So please play with that. Please call if you have questions. One of the biggest things, and to go back to the PowerPoint, here's Nina's contact information. Please talk to us. You know, one of our biggest challenges, I think, for instance, you know, you've heard this petition. The advocates have not come to talk to us, right? We have an open door. We're happy to talk to people. We love what we're doing. We're happy to explain it to anybody who wants to understand what we're doing on farms. So thank you very much for the time, and always happy to answer all.
Thank you. That was a lot of information. I'm sure we have questions. We're right at the noon hour.
Got you right before lunch.
So,
sorry.
sorry, we didn't get more time. That was great. Thank you for the thoroughness and your enthusiasm and all the great work you all have done in the 10 years since we passed Act 64. I don't mean to put you on the spot with this, but I just think it would be interesting for us to hear if you could summarize just briefly what you think the problem the dedelegation petition is trying to solve is.
I think the issue is, you know, farms are being regulated, right? We send these referrals to the Agency of Natural Resources. And Agency of Natural Resources has been taking enforcement, and we've been taking enforcement. So it's not that there's not regulatory work going on these farms. There just haven't been permits issued when there's a direct discharge. And that's what really the fundamental piece is, that is the Clean Water Act requirement. That's at least my understanding, right, of what the state has not accomplished, that EPA is saying you're a delegated entity and you need to make sure that you comply with those terms.
Thank you again. We very likely will want to have you back.
We're, again, open book and happy to educate. We do all this wonderful work and love to share it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are gonna wrap it up for lunch. Public service announcement. If you haven't looked closely at the agenda, we're not back till 2 today, so you'll have a little extra time to do your other work from after lunch. We will reconvene.